The Ghost of Wall Street, A Father's Debt. The world remembers Elias Thorne as the Ice King of Manhattan, the billionaire hedge fund manager who vanished during the 2008 financial crash, leaving behind a trail of ruined banks and a daughter who didn't even know his middle name. They called him a coward, they called him a thief, but they didn't see what was hidden in the sub-basement of a derelict brownstone in Brooklyn, a room where a dying man was rewriting the future of the world with nothing but a legal pad and a broken heart. The Silent Foundation. In the high-stakes world of New York high finance, Elias Thorne was a predator. To the public, he was the embodiment of greed, a man who sold his soul for basis points and offshore accounts. But to his daughter, Clara, he was simply a shadow that smelled of expensive tobacco and old paper. When Clara was 6, her mother died in a tragic accident that the tabloids feasted on. Elias didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't even hold her hand. Instead, he returned to his office and stayed there for 3 days. Clara grew up in the gilded cage of an Upper East Side penthouse provided for by a father who communicated through wire transfers and administrative assistance. She hated him for it. She hated the coldness, the calculated silence, and the way he seemed to value a stock's P/E ratio more than her graduation. Then came the crash. In September 2008, the global economy buckled. Elias Thorne's firm, Thorne Capital, was at the epicenter. While the world burned, Elias did the unthinkable. He disappeared. He didn't just quit, he erased himself. He left Clara with a frozen estate, a mountain of legal lawsuits, and a name that was now a curse. For 15 years, Clara lived in the shadow of that shame, working as a social worker, trying to atone for a father she barely knew, until the letter arrived. The Architect of Mercy. The letter wasn't from a lawyer, it was a set of GPS coordinates and a heavy brass key. They led her to a forgotten neighborhood in Brooklyn, to a building that looked like a tomb. When Clara stepped inside, she didn't find stolen gold or Swiss bank records. She found a library of human lives. Elias hadn't run away to hide his wealth. He had run away because he realized that the system he helped build was going to destroy his daughter's generation. He had spent 15 years living in near poverty, using his legendary mathematical mind to track the butterfly effect of every dollar he had ever earned. He had become a shadow guardian. The walls were covered in complex equations, not for profit, but for protection. Elias had calculated the exact trajectory of Clara's life. He knew the debt she would face, the medical crises her future children might inherit, and the economic collapses yet to come. The ultimate hedge. As Clara dug deeper, she realized that theft Elias was accused of wasn't a crime. It was a massive, decentralized trust fund hidden in plain sight. He hadn't kept the money, he had redistributed it into thousands of micro-investments that fueled local pharmacies, funded scholarships for children who would one day become Clara's doctors, and stabilized the very infrastructure of the city she walked through every day. He had turned himself into a villain so that the world would be a softer place for her to land. In the center of the room sat a final recording. Elias, his face gaunt and his eyes tired, spoke directly to the camera. "Clara," he whispered, "a father's love isn't always a hug or a bedtime story. Sometimes it's a shield. I spent my life building a world that was too hard for you. I spent my final years making sure that world would never break you. You think I left you with nothing? Look closer. Every light that stays on in this city, every stranger who offers you a hand, that is me. I am the silence that keeps you safe."
The legacy of the invisible. Clara realized then that her father hadn't been cold, he had been incandescent. He had sacrificed his reputation, his comfort, and his very presence in her life to act as a silent architect of her security. He was the ghost of Wall Street, but not the one the papers described. He was the man who traded his soul to ensure his daughter would never have to sell hers. The story of Elias Thorne is the story of the most destitute billionaire in history, a man who died with $0 in his pocket, but a world-saving debt paid in full. It is a testament to a father's love that doesn't ask for recognition, only for the safety of the one he left behind. Chapter 2. The Paper Trail of a Ghost. The discovery in the Brooklyn brownstone wasn't just a collection of dusty ledgers, it was a map of a life lived in the margins. As Clara ran her fingers over the edges of the legal pads, she noticed something chilling. The dates on the entries didn't stop when Elias vanished in 2008. They continued through the 2010s, through the pandemic of 2020, right up till 3 months ago. He had been alive. He had been here. She found a small military-grade laptop tucked behind a false wall. When she opened it, there was no password, only a single file named The Cost of Living. Inside was a database that defied logic. It wasn't a list of stocks, it was a list of names, thousands of them. Sarah Jenkins, 2012, paid mortgage via anonymous community grant. Result, daughter stayed in school. Daughter is now Clara's lead nurse at the clinic. Marcus Thorne, no relation, 2015, hospital bill settled via clerical error. Result, family stayed out of debt. Marcus now manages the security for Clara's apartment building. Clara felt a cold shiver. Her father hadn't just been watching her, he had been curated the very environment she breathed in. He had used his financial genius to play God, but not for power, for a perimeter of safety. The mathematics of sacrifice. Elias Thorne understood a concept most billionaires ignored, the multiplier effect. He realized that $1 million in a bank account was stagnant, but $1,000 given to the right person at the exact moment of their desperation could change the fabric of reality. He had lived in the basement of this building, sleeping on a cot, eating canned soup, managing a shadow fund worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had stripped himself of the silk suits and the Hamptons estate, choosing the life of a monk to ensure that every cent he had stolen from the banks during the crash was funneled back into the infrastructure of his daughter's life. But there was a catch. To keep the money invisible from the IRS and the FBI, Elias had to remain a criminal in the eyes of the law. He had to let the world believe he was a monster. If he ever stepped forward to hug his daughter, the shadow fund would be seized, and the thousands of people he was supporting, the people who unknowingly protected Clara, would fall. The encounter in the dark. As the sun began to set, casting long, skeletal shadows across the Brooklyn room, a floorboard creaked behind her. Clara spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the doorway stood a man. He was thin, his hair a shock of white, wearing a janitor's uniform from a nearby subway station. But the eyes, sharp, gray, and calculating, were unmistakable. "You weren't supposed to find this until I was gone, Clara," the man said, his voice like gravel over silk. "You're dead," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "The police, the DNA from the car in the river." "A financial transaction," Elias said, stepping into the light. "I bought a body, I bought a report, and I bought a life of silence. I gave up being your father so I could be your guardian. There is a difference." "I hated you," she screamed, the weight of 15 years of shame crashing down. Elias looked at her, and for the first time, the Ice King cracked. A single tear tracked through the deep lines of his face. "I know, and that was the highest price I had to pay. Your love was the only thing I couldn't figure out how to hedge." The final move. Elias revealed the true reason he had allowed her to find him now. The system he had built was under threat. A new wave of predatory algorithms, AI-driven hedge funds, were beginning to sniff out the anomalies in the market where his shadow fund operated. They were coming for the money, and they were coming for the people he protected. "I am dying, Clara," he said simply, gesturing to the oxygen tank hidden behind the desk. "I can't fight them from the shadows anymore. I need you to do the one thing."
The verdict and the void. The jury reached a verdict in less than 4 hours. Clara was found guilty of a minor technicality, failure to report foreign assets, resulting in a suspended sentence and community service. But the shadow fund? The court ruled it socially irrevocable. The billions stayed where they were, fueling the lives of the people Elias had chosen. On the 1-year anniversary of his death, Clara returned to the Brooklyn brownstone. It was now a community center, funded by the very man the world still whispered about. She sat in his old chair, looking at the city skyline. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of his absence. She felt the pulse of his presence. She realized that every time a child in the city went to a library he saved, or a family stayed in a home he protected, Elias Thorne was speaking to her. A father's love is often measured by what he gives his children while he is alive, but Elias Thorne's love was measured by what he was willing to lose, his name, his life, and his soul, to ensure that when he was gone, his daughter would never have to walk alone. The Ice King had finally melted, and in his place, he left a garden growing in the middle of a concrete jungle. The debt was paid, the hedge was closed, the father was at last at peace. Chapter 4. The Algorithm of Redemption. The legal victory was only the beginning. While the courts had validated the shadow fund, the financial elite of Wall Street, the men who had once called Elias Thorne their peer, were not so easily appeased. To them, Elias wasn't a hero. He was a traitor who had exposed the fragility of their ivory towers. Clara soon realized that the predators her father had warned her about were closing in. They didn't want the money for the people. They wanted the Thorne algorithm, the mathematical formula that allowed Elias to predict human need and economic shifts with 99.9% accuracy. The Invisible War. Clara moved back into the Brooklyn brownstone, not as a resident, but as a guardian. She discovered that the laptop she had found was only one node in a massive hidden network. Her father had built a decentralized, living computer that ran on the excess heat and unused processing power of the very buildings he had funded. "It's a ghost in the machine," explained Julian, a young coder who had been one of the first recipients of an anonymous Thorne scholarship. He had tracked the data to Clara's door. "Your father didn't just hide money, he created a self-sustaining economic ecosystem. It's like he built a second, kinder version of the internet underneath the one we use." But the Ice King's old rivals had hired digital mercenaries to tear it down. Night after night, Clara and Julian watched the screens as waves of cyber attacks hammered the shadow fund's firewalls. Clara realized that her father's sacrifice wasn't a static event. It was an ongoing battle. He had given her the tools, but she had to man the walls. The final message. Deep within the encrypted core of the Thorne algorithm, Clara found a hidden partition. It was dated the day before Elias died. Unlike the previous data, this wasn't a spreadsheet or a photo. It was a simulation. Elias had used his final hours to run a model of Clara's life without the money. He had run millions of versions of her future. In some, she was a successful lawyer, in others, a struggling artist, but in every single one where she was wealthy and protected by him, she was unhappy.
The simulation showed that the only way for Clara to find true purpose was for her to lose everything and then choose to build it back herself. "He didn't just hedge against the world," Clara whispered, tears blurring her vision. "He hedged against my own complacency." The Ice King had known that if he just gave her billions, he would ruin her character. So he made her a criminal, made her fight a trial, and made her earn the right to lead. He had engineered her struggle to ensure her strength. The new architecture. Clara didn't wait for the mercenaries to break through. In a move that would have made her father proud, she executed a Phoenix protocol. She didn't hide the algorithm, she open-sourced it. She released the Thorne algorithm to every university, every small-town credit union, and every nonprofit on the planet. By making the secret public, she made it worthless to the predators and priceless to the people. The shadow fund dissolved, but in its place, millions of mini-funds sprouted up across the globe. The Wall Street titans watched in horror as their monopoly on financial intelligence evaporated. Elias Thorne had successfully bankrupted greed itself. The quiet exit. Years later, Clara Thorne walked through Central Park. No one recognized her. The headlines had moved on to newer scandals and fresher faces. She lived in a modest apartment and worked as a consultant for ethical tech firms. She stopped by a bench where an old man was teaching his grandson how to play chess. The boy was using a set of high-quality wooden pieces, the kind provided to the park by a local anonymous trust. Clara sat down and pulled a small, worn legal pad from her bag. She didn't write numbers or stock symbols. She wrote a letter to a father who was no longer a ghost, but a part of the wind, the pavement, and the heartbeat of the city. "Dear Dad," she wrote, "the world is still messy, it's still loud, but the lights are staying on, and for the first time I'm not looking for you in the shadows, I'm looking for you in the light." The story of the father who gave everything ended not with a bang, but with a peaceful silence. Elias Thorne had been the ghost of Wall Street, but Clara Thorne became the architect of the morning. The debt was settled, the daughter was free, and the love, unseen, uncredited, and indestructible, remained. Chapter 5. The Ripple Effect. The open sourcing of the Thorne algorithm didn't just change the stock market, it changed the definition of inheritance across the United States. In the years following Clara's decision, the Thorne model became a standard curriculum in economic departments from Harvard to Stanford. But for Clara, the impact was much more personal. She began to receive letters, thousands of them. They weren't addressed to the daughter of a billionaire. They were addressed to the daughter of a man who saw them when they were invisible. One letter came from a veteran in Montana who had received a grant to start a sustainable farm. Another from a girl in the Bronx who became the first in her family to graduate from MIT because of a mystery scholarship. Each story was a stitch in the safety net Elias had woven. The final mystery. Despite the transparency of the algorithm, one question remained: the zero account. Deep within the code, there was a small, dormant sum of money, exactly $1 million, that had never been touched, never invested, and never moved. It was labeled, "For the Crossing." For a long time, Clara thought it was a burial fund or a final bribe. But as she studied the trigger conditions for that account, she realized it was set to activate only when a specific biometric signature was detected at a small private airstrip in upstate New York. Curiosity, mixed with a lingering hope she couldn't quite kill, led her to that airstrip on a cold October morning. The meeting at the horizon. As she stood on the tarmac, a small, unassuming propeller plane landed. A woman stepped out. Not her father, but a lawyer Clara recognized as one of the few people Elias had trusted. "Your father knew you'd find the zero account," she said, handing Clara a small wooden box. "He didn't want you to have this until the world was safe and until you were sure you didn't need it." Inside the box wasn't money. It was a collection of hand-drawn maps of the stars, a pair of old binoculars, and a deed to a small plot of land in the Appalachian Mountains. He bought this land when he was 22, before the billions, before the Ice King. He used to go there to remember that the universe is bigger than a balance sheet. He wanted you to have a place where you weren't Thorne, a place where you were just a person under the stars. Clara drove to the coordinates. She found a modest cabin overlooking a valley that glowed with the gold and crimson of autumn. On the porch was a rocking chair, and on the side table, a final handwritten note. Clara, if you are reading this, the algorithm is public, the predators are gone, and you are standing on a piece of earth that owes nothing to anyone. Finance is the art of predicting the future, but love is the art of protecting it. I spent my life looking at screens so that you could eventually look at this view. Don't look back. The debt is paid in full. Dad. Conclusion. The Legend of the Ghost. In the high-speed corridors of Wall Street, the name Elias Thorne eventually became a ghost story told to young analysts, a warning of what happens when a man cares too much. But in the quiet streets of Brooklyn, in the clinics of the Midwest, and in the heart of a woman standing on a mountain in Appalachia, he was something else entirely. Elias Thorne was the man who realized that the greatest wealth isn't what you collect, but what you are willing to give away to keep someone else warm. He lived a lie so his daughter could live the truth. He became a monster so she could remain an angel. And as the sun set over the mountains, Clara Thorne finally put down the ledgers. She picked up the